Hello, my name's Megan Harold. I'm very pleased to be talking with you. Thanks to Professor Johnson for asking me to, say a little bit about Aemilia Lanyer's book of poems, Salve Deus Rex Judaeorum. I'll first start off by introducing myself a little bit. I'll then say a little bit about the sort of key ideas I think according to me, should be applied to this text. And then throughout that discussion, I'll sort of pepper in some works of criticism that I think are key to understanding this text. So first off, so my name is Megan Harold. I got my degree in 2018 from USC. So I'm what you'd call an early career scholar. Doing my best, hustling. And right now I'm actually teaching, I'm an assistant professor faculty fellow at NYU Shanghai. So I got a call in June to come out, see if I was interested in coming to China. There wasn't a lot going on in terms of the States and COVID, so I sort of jumped at the chance, and here I am in Shanghai in my apartment. Teaching in person with NYU Shanghai in the Liberal Studies department. So yeah, it's been interesting so far. Let's see, my work is on, I'm one of those bridge people. I do medieval into the early modern period and make a case for kind of blurring that boundary. My work is on how canonical writers, I go from Chaucer, Spenser, Shakespeare, Lanyer, how these canonical writers deploy conventional misogynistic tropes, particularly character tropes, of froward or unruly women in order to rethink political possibilities. So like I said, I'm blurring that boundary between the medieval and early modern period. The character tropes that I like or that I'm drawn to are usually pretty funny, but have potentially disturbing implications, but also kind of surprisingly, they make room for thinking through political structures that might apply to a broader range of person. So I'm thinking of the Loathly Lady tradition, Fortuna, and then when I was writing my 5th chapter on Lanyer, the figure that I was drawn to especially was the Virgin Mary herself, and particularly in this tradition that's Catholic from the 13th century, probably earlier, called the Stabat Mater Dolorosa tradition. The sorrowful mother stood at the foot of the cross. So my work on Lanyer, so like I said, it's from my 5th dissertation chapter. I was able to wrangle it into an article for studies in philology. So the majority of my talk, I say more in that article if you'd like to check into anything that I mentioned here. Right, so the crux of my argument was about how Lanyer taps into this tradition, the Stabat Mater tradition, to rethink the possibilities and the politics of reading. I see her as establishing a community of women in her poem, all geared towards reading each other charitably. And her sort of primary example is Mary feeling compassion for Christ's passion, and in so doing, blurring the boundary between him and her, between suffering and feeling suffering for another, all that sort of thing. So throughout, I was very drawn to the descriptions of Christ as well, where he starts to sound a little bit more like Mary, being compassionate. Okay, so here are some of the key ideas about that sort of circulate around this book of poems. And so I first should say that Lanyer's identity also it has been of interest to scholars in the past. For a while, there was a drive to try to align her with Shakespeare's Dark Lady. By all reports, Lanyer was very beautiful. People don't believe that she truly was the Dark Lady, but it's kind of an interesting inroad, I think, to thinking about her. So we have evidence that she was quite lovely. She's also referenced a lot in an astrologer's diary. So a guy who she would consult about her her fortune-telling, kind of like her future. Also, she would describe sort of medical ailments to him. We know that she was unhappy in her current marriage when she was seeing this astrologer guy, and also that she had suffered some miscarriages. She was the daughter of a court musician of Elizabeth I, who had immigrated from Venice. And so some people think that because of this background, it's I haven't gone into the archive or anything to check on this, but there is speculation that she might have been of Jewish descent. So thinking of that possibility, it adds interest to her sort of doctrinal influences and her play, I think, with various traditions throughout the poem that you'll likely pick up on. Some scholars have taken her possibly Jewish heritage and drawn out the sort of racial or ethnic implications in the poem. So, for instance, taking Kim Hall's Things of Darkness as sort of a foundational text, Barbara Bowen is a scholar who wrote specifically about Lanyer. So her piece is called, it's a book chapter called Aemilia Lanyer and the Invention of White Womanhood. And so she really delves into the sort of Petrarchan tropes that Lanyer deploys, and sort of argues that she's constructing whiteness, white femininity, through particularly her discussion of Cleopatra, Lanyer's discussion of Cleopatra. But other sort of critics have taken up Lanyer's interesting class status. So she was the daughter of court musicians. She married a court musician eventually, but after her parents died, she sort of was, well, I should stop. So when she was younger, she was highly educated for a woman in particular. She lived with Susan Bertie, Countess of Kent, where she was introduced to Latin. Bertie apparently valued female education. She made sure that the women in her house were as educated as the young men. She also Lanyer also lived with Margaret Clifford, Countess of Cumberland, and as you read the poem, you certainly see her devotion to Cumberland and Cumberland's daughter, Lady Anne Clifford. So some critics have taken up this sort of class status. So, she's a member of the gentry, but maybe aspirational, trying to get higher. And so after her parents died, as I was saying, Lanyer became the mistress of the queen's cousin. What is this guy's name? I'm bad with names. I'm not primarily fired up by the history of everything, so sorry about that. But her I don't know, this guy that she was the mistress of was named Henry Carey, so Elizabeth I's cousin. When she was impregnated by this man, she was sort of pawned off and found a suitable husband. So this was a cousin of hers, Alfonso Lanyer, another musician. She named her first son, the son that she had by this man, Henry. So it's pretty clear that it was likely his child. So anyway, given her interesting class status, a lot of critics have been drawn to, in particular, her dedicatory poems and also the country house poem that ends the volume. So in this critical thread, they're very interested in the debates that fired people up in the 1990s and early aughts about authorship and how writers are constructing themselves as an author to enter the marketplace. And so in that way, she's often kind of seen along the same lines as Ben Jonson, so another writer of a country house poem whose class status is interesting and who really strove to authorize himself as canonical, to be read. The mere fact of particularly that she was a woman overseeing the construction or the publication of a book of poems is remarkable. So yeah, that might be something that you grow interested in. In Lanyer's case, sometimes this thread of criticism becomes, in my mind, a little judgmental of her. Some critics see her dedicatory poems in particular as sort of suing for patronage, social climbing gets kind of thrown around a lot with her. anyway, you can judge that yourself. In this trend, I really like let's see, what is her name? Oh, Wendy Wall. So Wendy Wall, great scholar. She wrote of Lanier sort of fashioning herself as an author, an authoress, in Our Bodies, Our Texts, Renaissance Women and the Trials of Authorship, which is a book chapter that I can I'll link for you maybe in the comments section of this video. And then of course people are very drawn to the centerpiece of the poem, the Passion poem. That was my primary interest too, although in my journal article, which I'll just flash for you and I'll send it as well to y'all, I also take up sort of the dedicatory poems a little bit. So anyway, the Passion poem, a lot of people will put Lanyer in this sort of broader trend of women writers and basically any writer who's taking on the passion as a topic. And so of these scholars, I join my work joins a lot of other scholars who are doing this as well. I was really taken by her turn to these more Catholic, capital C, tropes. And for others interested in that, I would recommend Gary Kuchar's ELR article, Aemilia Lanyer and the Virgin Swoon, Theology and Iconography in Salve Deus Rex Judaeorum. And so he puts the sort of sorrowful Mary, compassionate suffering in line with the art historical tradition, the Virgin Swoon, where she's like literally falling over with pain, the pains of childbirth when her son is dying. So sort of conflating time, blurring the line between his body and hers. I find that very generative myself. I also would really recommend Victoria Brownlee's Renaissance Quarterly article. She puts Lanyer in conversation with other women writers taking up the similar sort of trope of the passion. So her article is called Literal and Spiritual Births, Mary as Mother in 17th Century Women's Writing. So as you're reading, you probably will notice how kind of weird it gets with there's sort of the suggestion that the poem itself might have been the production of its author, not necessarily just the sort of written production, but maybe even the sort of like the baby. Yeah. So anyway, very interesting stuff here. So my article also kind of delves into the sort of queer possibilities in the poem, and in that light, I want to also sort of flag this scholar's work, John Garrison. He's, prominent in the sort of queer theoretical field, and his article was also in Studies in Philology, so I like it better. His is called Aemilia Lanyer's Salve Deus Rex Judaeorum and the Production of Possibility, and he really gets into how strange the I is throughout the poem. Who is speaking and when? Who is ventriloquizing? Someone else, perhaps? So he grapples with it, and he's a particular focus for him is the Defense of Eve section. So like, who is actually speaking there is kind of an open question, and for Garrison, this production of possibility through the polyvocality of the poem is quite generative in terms of community building, and I very much agree, and kind of just add to his work, add upon his work. So my piece again is called Compassionate Petrarchanism. Ooh, where did it go? Here it is. Okay, so yeah, Compassionate Petrarchanism, the Stabat Mater Dolorosa tradition. So I'm sort of arguing that this her turn to this Catholic tradition that blurs the boundary between Mary and Christ, Christ and Mary, men and women, sort of the racial implications there too. I find it interesting that Pilate's wife primarily mounts the defense of Eve upon looking at Christ. So she's looking at Christ, defending Eve, a Jewish woman, and Pilate's wife is presumably not Jewish or Christian. So I find it very generative, the sort of possibilities there of boundary blurring and yeah, just, I don't know, compassion. So anyway, you can read that. But oh yeah, and I use that trope here to I see it as Lanyer's critique of the ways that Petrarchanism intends to stratify to really reify the lines between observer and observed. So in contradiction to that, the Stabat Mater Dolorosa tradition is very much invested in blurring the lines between observer and observed. So I find it very exciting there. Let's see. Yes, I also push back against seeing Lanyer as a social climber. I sort of don't really, I don't know, I might be wrong, whatever. I don't really see her, some of her dedicatory poems are to very, very high up people like kings, queens, etc. Not kings, sorry, lots of queens. And I don't know, I don't know. I don't really buy it. Anyway. Yeah, so I see her using this tradition to impress upon her readers this mode of reading and responding to women in particular a little bit more charitably. So seeing themselves in the women that they're considering. Rather than judging them. Okay, so yes, and then also there's a section where I put Lanyer's work in conversation with this kind of very popular trend in the 1590s and into the 17th century that another scholar has called the leaping text fad. So it's a bit strange that in burgeoning sort of Protestant religions that a lot of writers in England were turning to these rather Catholic tropes. So you might put Lanyer in conversation with those figures as well. Yeah. So anyway, I'm happy to share these works with you. And let me see. I wanted to also show you primarily what I used to do my work was the Women Writers Online has a really lovely interface where you can track cross-cultural sort of resonances between all of women's work, all of the women writers that have published between these time periods. So it's quite nice. Just want to do a plug for them over at Northeastern University. And then, of course, I owe a debt of gratitude to Suzanne Woods, who compiled this great edition and really made Lanyer accessible to a new generation of scholars. But I guess this proves I'm in China. Anyway, I hope your class is going well. Feel free to email me with any questions you have. In the video that I post in the comment section, I'll go ahead and link all the articles that I rather like, and of course, you'll find more info in my published piece too, if you get interested. So anyway, I hope you have a great semester. I know things are crazy. Hang in there. Okay, take care.